The gentle autumn breeze rustled the colorful leaves as Lily made her way up the steps of Westlake High School. Her white cane tapped rhythmically against the concrete, creating a steady beat that helped her navigate the unfamiliar territory. Behind her, her mom Carol whispered words of encouragement, but they did little to calm the tornado of nerves swirling in Lily's stomach. "You've got this, honey," Carol said, giving her daughter's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Just like we practiced." Lily nodded, adjusting the strap of her backpack. At 17, she was used to being the new kid. Her dad's job had moved them 3 times in the past 5 years. But starting at a new school halfway through junior year was especially challenging. Add to that the fact that she had been blind since birth, and the challenge doubled. "I know, Mom," Lily said, forcing confidence into her voice. "I'll be fine." The school counselor, Mrs. Thompson, met them at the front entrance. Her voice was warm and welcoming as she introduced herself. "It's wonderful to meet you, Lily. We're so excited to have you join us at Westlake." The counselor's heels clicked against the hallway floor as she led them to her office. The sounds of student life echoed around them. Lockers slamming, snippets of conversation, bursts of laughter. Lily took it all in, building a mental map of her new environment. In the counselor's office, they went over Lily's schedule. The school had made arrangements for her textbooks in Braille, and a student volunteer would help her navigate between classes for the first week. "And I see you've taken piano lessons for 12 years?" Mrs. Thompson said, the surprise evident in her voice. "Yes," Lily replied, perking up at the mention of music. "I started when I was 5. Lily's been playing classical piano since before she could properly pronounce Beethoven," Carol added, pride warming her tone. Her teacher back home said she was one of the most talented students she'd ever taught. Mrs. Thompson hummed thoughtfully. "Well, that's wonderful. You know, our school has an award-winning choir program. They're always looking for skilled pianists." For the first time that morning, a genuine smile spread across Lily's face. "Really? Do you think they might need someone?" "It's possible. Mr. Baker, the choir director, is quite particular, but it wouldn't hurt to ask." They rehearse in the music hall after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introductions and orientations. Lily's student guide, a cheerful senior named Tina, helped her find her classes and described the layout of each room. By lunchtime, Lily's head was swimming with new information. "Want to sit with me and my friends?" Tina offered as they entered the cafeteria. Lily hesitated. The prospect of meeting more new people was overwhelming, but she reminded herself of her promise to try harder at this school. To put herself out there. To make friends, sure, that would be nice. Lunch was better than expected. Tina's friends were curious about Lily, but not in the awkward, pitying way she'd experienced at her last school. They asked about her interests, and when she mentioned piano, one of the boys perked up. "You play piano? That's awesome. I'm in the choir here. We've got this huge competition coming up in a couple months." Mrs. Thompson mentioned that, Lily said. Her interest piqued. She thought maybe the choir could use a pianist. The boy, Jason, she remembered, made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. "Oh man, Mr. Baker would love that. Our regular pianist is good, but he's also on the basketball team, so he misses rehearsals sometimes. Mr. Baker goes on these epic rants about commitment and priorities." "What's he like?" "Mr. Baker, I mean." There was a momentary silence around the table. Lily could practically feel the glances being exchanged. "He's intense," Tina finally said. "Super talented, and he's taken the choir to nationals 3 years in a row. But he has really high standards. He made Randy Winters cry last year," another voice added. "And Randy was a linebacker on the football team." Lily swallowed hard, her earlier enthusiasm dimming. She'd encountered plenty of people who doubted her abilities because of her blindness. The last thing she needed was a teacher who would write her off before giving her a chance. But still, the thought of playing with a choir again made her heart leap. Back at her old school, those twice-weekly rehearsals had been the highlight of her week. "When does the choir meet?" she asked, making up her mind. "Today after school," Jason said. "Hey, if you want, I could take you to the music hall." The rest of the day crawled by. In each class, Lily had to introduce herself, navigate new teaching styles, and figure out how to keep up with note-taking. By the final bell, her brain felt like it had run a marathon, but instead of heading to the front entrance where her mom would be waiting, she texted Carol asking for another hour, then met Jason at her locker. "Ready to meet the dragon?" he asked cheerfully. Lily adjusted her dark glasses nervously. "Is he really that bad?" "Nah, I'm just messing with you. He's tough but fair, most of the time." The music hall was on the opposite side of campus. As they approached, Lily could hear the sound of voices warming up, scales rising and falling in perfect harmony. Her steps quickened involuntarily. Inside, the room smelled of wood polish and paper. The acoustics were different too. Sound bounced differently here, giving her a sense of a large space with high ceilings. "Mr. Baker?" Jason called out. "Got a minute?" The piano music that had been accompanying the vocal exercises stopped abruptly. "Mr. Chen, unless the building is on fire, I do not got a minute. We have less than 8 weeks until regionals, and the sopranos are still struggling with the bridge and handle." The voice was male, middle-aged, with the crisp enunciation of someone who spent their life correcting others' pronunciation. "Sorry, sir, but this is important. This is Lily Walker. She's new here and she's a pianist. I thought maybe she could help out, when Rick has basketball." There was a pause, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching. "Miss Walker," Mr. Baker said, his voice closer now. "While I appreciate your interest, our choir program maintains extremely high standards. We're preparing for competitions that require precision, dedication, and extensive musical training." Lily felt her cheeks grow warm. There it was, the instant dismissal she'd been bracing for. "I understand," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I've been playing piano for 12 years. I was the accompanist for my school choir at my previous school. We competed at the state level last year." Another pause. "I see. Well, that's certainly impressive. However, our arrangements are quite complex and our rehearsal schedule is demanding." Lily knew what was coming next, the carefully worded explanation of why it wouldn't work out, the suggestion that maybe there were other activities better suited to her situation. But before Mr. Baker could continue, another voice, female with a slight accent, interrupted. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Robert. At least let the girl play before you dismiss her. Mrs. Rodriguez, I am in the middle of a rehearsal, yes, I know, and your accompanist is absent again. So why not let her try? What do you have to lose?" Mr. Baker sighed heavily. "Fine. Miss Walker, are you familiar with Mozart's Ave Verum Corpus?" Lily felt a flutter of relief. "Yes, sir. In D major. Very well. The sheet music is on the piano if you need it." "I don't," Lily said simply. "I know it by heart." Jason guided her to the piano bench, whispering, "Good luck," before retreating. Lily ran her fingers lightly over the keys, getting a feel for the instrument. It was a beautiful grand piano, probably a Steinway, well-maintained and perfectly in tune. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hands in position and began to play the gentle opening chords of the Mozart piece. The familiar music flowed through her fingers, and she felt herself relaxing into it. This was her element. This was where she belonged. She was so absorbed in the music that she almost missed Mr. Baker's signal to the choir to begin singing. But years of accompanying had honed her sensitivity to a conductor's cues, and she adjusted her tempo slightly to match his direction. The choir's voices rose above her playing, pure, disciplined, and emotionally rich. Lily felt goosebumps rise on her arms. This wasn't just a good high school choir. This was something special. When the piece ended, there was a moment of silence. Then Mrs. Rodriguez spoke. "Well, Robert, what do you think?" Mr. Baker cleared his throat. "Your technique is adequate, Miss Walker, but I wonder if you might struggle with some of our more challenging pieces. We're working on Whitaker's Lux Orumque, which requires precise timing and communication with the conductor." Lily felt a flare of determination. "I'd be happy to try it, sir." She heard murmurs from the choir members and someone whispered, "He doesn't even let Rick play that one." "Perhaps another time," Mr. Baker said dismissively. "We've already lost 10 minutes of rehearsal. Thank you for coming in, Miss Walker, but I don't think—" "I believe we have copies of all our current repertoire in the digital music library," Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted. "I could email them to Lily tonight and she could come prepared to Thursday's rehearsal." As a proper audition, there was another heavy sigh from Mr. Baker. "Very well. Thursday after school, Miss Walker. Don't be late." As Jason led her out of the music hall a few minutes later, Lily felt a mix of emotions, frustration at Mr. Baker's obvious skepticism, but also excitement at the chance to prove herself. "That was amazing," Jason said enthusiastically. "I've never seen anyone challenge the Baker Dragon and survive." Lily laughed despite herself. "I think that was more Mrs. Rodriguez than me. Yeah, she's cool. She teaches Spanish and helps with choir sometimes. But seriously, you played that Mozart piece beautifully. I can't wait to see Baker's face when you crush the audition on Thursday. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, Lily felt a spark of hope. Maybe this new school wouldn't be so bad after all. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found her place. As her mom's car pulled up to the curb, Lily couldn't stop smiling. She had 2 days to prepare. 2 days to memorize whatever music Mrs. Rodriguez sent her. 2 days to show Mr. Baker and everyone else at Westlake exactly what she could do. The next morning, Grace woke up earlier than usual. Her fingers had been busy in her dreams, playing phantom melodies on imaginary keys. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and asked it to check her email. "You have one new message from Maria Ortiz," the automated voice announced. Grace sat up straight, fully awake now. "Open it, please." Mrs. Ortiz had sent 6 audio files, each labeled with the name of a piece the choir was working on for regionals. Along with them was a brief message. "These are recordings of our rehearsal pianist playing each piece. I've also attached PDF files of the sheet music, though I understand you may not need them. Good luck tomorrow," Grace smiled. The teacher had been thoughtful enough not to mention her blindness directly, while still acknowledging it. She plugged in her earbuds and started listening to the first piece. By the time she needed to get ready for school, she had already listened to each recording twice. The music wasn't particularly difficult. She had played more challenging pieces before, but Mr. Baker's arrangement had interesting harmonies that would require careful attention. "You're up early," her mom said when Grace came downstairs for breakfast. "Everything okay?" "Mrs. Ortiz sent the music for my audition tomorrow," Grace explained, buttering a piece of toast. "I want to have it memorized by then." Susan made an impressed sound. "All of it? How many pieces?" "6, Grace said, taking a bite of her toast. "Honey, that's a lot to memorize in 2 days." Grace shrugged. "It's what I do, Mom. It's how I've always learned music." Without sheet music she could see, Grace had developed an extraordinary ability to memorize music by ear. Her previous piano teacher had called it a gift, one of the unexpected advantages of her blindness. "Just don't push yourself too hard," Susan cautioned. "This is only your 2nd day at a new school." "I won't," Grace promised, though they both knew she absolutely would. At school, Grace found herself counting the hours until she could get home and practice. Even in her English class, usually her favorite subject, she caught herself tapping out rhythms on her desk with her fingers. During lunch, Tyler slid onto the bench beside her in the cafeteria. "So, did Mrs. O send you the music?" Grace nodded, taking a sip of her water. "Last night, and?" Tyler prompted. "And I'm working on it," Grace said with a small smile. "No spoilers," Tyler laughed. "Fair enough. Just know that the whole bass section is rooting for you. Rick is a decent pianist, but he misses way too many rehearsals." After school, Grace hurried home and went straight to her keyboard. It wasn't as nice as the grand piano in the music hall. Just a digital keyboard her parents had bought her for her 13th birthday, but it was good enough for practice. She plugged in her headphones and got to work. One by one, she played through each piece, listening to the recordings Mrs. Ortiz had sent whenever she got stuck. The hours slipped by unnoticed. "Grace?" Her mother's voice finally broke through her concentration. "It's almost 9 o'clock. You need to eat something." Grace pulled off her headphones, surprised. 9 already?" "Already," Susan confirmed. "I've called you 3 times for dinner. Your father saved you a plate." Grace's stomach growled, reminding her that she'd skipped her after-school snack. "Sorry, Mom, I lost track of time. How's it coming along?" Susan asked as they walked to the kitchen together. "Good, I think," Grace said. "I've got most of them down. Just need to polish a couple sections." While she ate her reheated dinner, Grace's dad asked about her day. She told him about her classes, her new friends, and finally about the choir. "This director," he said when she'd finished. "He sounds like a piece of work," Grace shrugged. "Tyler says he's just really passionate about music." "There's passionate, and then there's being a jerk," her father replied. "Just don't let him get to you, okay? If he can't see how talented you are, that's his problem." "I know, Dad," Grace said. But privately, she thought it wasn't that simple. She didn't just want Mr. Baker to acknowledge her talent. She wanted to be part of something special. And from what she'd heard yesterday, this choir was definitely special. After dinner, she returned to her keyboard for another hour before finally calling it a night. As she lay in bed, Melodies swirled through her head, making sleep elusive. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation. Grace barely heard her teacher's lectures, her mind constantly returning to the music she would play that afternoon. During lunch, she excused herself to find an empty classroom where she could practice fingerings on a desk. When the final bell rang, she met Tyler at her locker as planned. "Ready for the big showdown?" he asked, his voice bouncing with excitement. Grace took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." As they walked to the music hall, Tyler filled the silence with cheerful chatter. "The whole choir knows about your audition today. Even Rick is curious. He showed up to rehearsal yesterday, first time in 2 weeks, just so he could scope out the competition." "Great," Grace muttered. "No pressure or anything." "Relax," Tyler said, bumping her shoulder gently with his. "You're going to blow them away. I heard you yesterday, remember?" They reached the music hall just as other choir members were filing in. Grace could feel their curious stares as Tyler led her to the piano. Her palms were sweaty and she wiped them on her jeans before sitting on the bench. "Miss Walker." Mr. Baker's voice came from somewhere to her right. "I see you decided to join us." "Yes, sir," Grace said, turning toward his voice. "Thank you for the opportunity." His footsteps approached the piano. "Mrs. Ortiz tells me she sent you our current repertoire. Have you had a chance to look it over?" Grace bit back the urge to point out the poor choice of words. "I've been practicing, yes." "Very well." Papers rustled as Mr. Baker sorted through his music. "Let's start with something simple. The Mendelssohn piece, perhaps." Grace nodded and positioned her hands over the keys. She took a deep breath, centering herself, then began to play. The piece was a gentle, flowing work that built gradually to a powerful chorus. Grace let herself sink into the music, focusing on bringing out the emotion in each phrase. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before Mr. Baker spoke. "Not bad," he said, his tone neutral. "You've clearly practiced. Let's try something more challenging. The Whitaker piece, Lux Aurumque." Grace knew this was the test he'd mentioned during their first meeting, a piece that required precise communication between pianist and conductor. She flexed her fingers and waited for his cue. "I'll conduct and you follow," he instructed. "The choir will remain silent for now. This is just to see if you can keep up." Grace nodded, her face set with determination. The piece began with delicate atmospheric chords that required a light touch. She started playing, listening carefully for any sounds that might indicate Mr. Baker's conducting gestures. The rustle of his shirt sleeve, the soft tap of his foot, even the rhythm of his breathing. After a few measures, he deliberately changed the tempo, slowing dramatically. Grace followed the change instantly. Then he accelerated, and again she matched him perfectly. He continued to throw curveballs, unexpected pauses, sudden dynamic shifts, but Grace stayed with him, her years of developing heightened auditory awareness serving her well. When the piece ended, the room remained completely silent. Even Mr. Baker didn't speak immediately. Finally, one of the choir members whispered, "Holy cow." The spell broken, several students began to applaud. Grace felt her cheeks grow warm. "Enough," Mr. Baker said, silencing the applause. "Miss Walker, it appears you have indeed prepared adequately. However, there's more to being a choir accompanist than simply playing the notes correctly. You must be reliable, punctual, and able to work under pressure." Grace nodded. "I understand. Do you? Because this isn't a hobby or a casual commitment. This is a serious program with high expectations." "With all due respect, Mr. Baker," Grace said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I've been playing piano since I was 5 years old. I've accompanied choirs, soloists, and musical theater productions. I've performed in recitals and competitions. I know what commitment means." Another silence fell over the room. Grace could almost feel Mr. Baker's scrutiny. "And what happens?" he asked finally. "When you encounter a piece of music you haven't memorized? When I make last-minute changes to the arrangement? When I need you to sight-read something on the spot?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Grace knew what he was really asking. How can a blind girl keep up? Before she could answer, Mrs. Ortiz's voice cut through the tension. "Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you change the key signature of the Thompson piece just before last year's state finals? And didn't Rick handle that change perfectly even though he hadn't seen the new arrangement?" "That's different," Mr. Baker began, "is it?" Mrs. Ortiz pressed. "Rick did it by ear. He listened to you play it once and replicated it. From what I've seen, that's exactly what Grace can do, probably even better. Grace held her breath, waiting for Mr. Baker's response. Fine, he said at last, his voice clipped. Miss Walker, I'm giving you a 2-week trial period as our alternate accompanist. You'll need to attend all rehearsals, learn any new pieces immediately, and be prepared to step in whenever Rick is absent. Grace could hardly believe what she was hearing. Yes, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Baker warned. I have extremely high standards, and I won't lower them for anyone. Is that clear? Crystal clear, Grace replied, unable to keep a small smile from spreading across her face. As the regular rehearsal began, Grace moved to an empty seat near the piano, listening intently as Rick played the pieces she had just performed. His style was different from hers, more technical, less emotional, but she could learn from that too. After rehearsal, Tyler found her waiting by the door. You did it, he exclaimed. You're officially part of the choir family now. Grace's smile widened. For 2 weeks at least. Please, Tyler scoffed. Once Baker sees what you can really do, those 2 weeks will turn into the rest of the year. As they walked toward the front of the school where her mom would be waiting, Grace felt a strange mix of triumph and trepidation. She had earned her chance, but the hard part was just beginning. Mr. Baker would be watching her closely, waiting for her to make a mistake, to prove his initial judgment correct. But for the first time in a long while, Grace felt ready for the challenge. She had found something worth fighting for, and she wasn't about to let anyone, especially not Mr. Baker, take it away from her. Over the next week, Grace threw herself into choir rehearsals with everything she had. Every afternoon she sat beside the piano, listening carefully as Rick played, mentally noting his style and the way Mr. Baker conducted. On days when Rick was absent for basketball practice, she took his place at the piano, hyper-aware of Mr. Baker's critical gaze. Again, he would say after she played through a piece. The tempo was dragging in the middle section. Or, those chords in measure 34 need to be crisper. Grace never argued, never defended herself. She simply nodded, adjusted her playing, and tried again. And again. And again if necessary. After rehearsals, she would return home and practice for hours, perfecting every note, every nuance. Her parents exchanged worried glances when they thought she couldn't hear, concerned about her intense focus. Honey, her dad said one evening as she finally emerged from her room for dinner, you know you don't have to prove anything to this teacher, right? Grace set her water glass down carefully. I'm not doing it for him, Dad, I'm doing it for me. I just don't want you putting too much pressure on yourself, he said. You've only been at this school for a week and a half. I know, Grace said, softening her tone. But this choir, it's special, and being part of it means a lot to me. Her mom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We understand, sweetheart. Just remember to take breaks sometimes, okay? Grace promised she would. Though music had always been more than a hobby for her, it was her escape, her joy, her way of connecting with a world that often kept her at arm's length because of her blindness. At Friday's rehearsal, Mr. Baker made a surprise announcement. As you know, the regional competition is 7 weeks away. To prepare, we'll be holding a pre-competition concert next Friday evening. Excited murmurs rippled through the choir. This will be a formal performance, he continued, with invited guests from the community, including several judges from last year's state competition. I expect nothing less than excellence from each of you. Grace felt her stomach tighten. A formal performance next week? She had barely gotten comfortable with the regular repertoire. As if reading her thoughts, Mr. Baker added, Miss Walker, since you're still in your trial period, Rick will handle the piano duties for this concert. Grace nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course, Mr. Baker wouldn't trust her with something so important yet. Still, she couldn't help feeling that she was being sidelined. After rehearsal, Tyler found her in the hallway. Hey, you okay? You rushed out pretty quick. Grace shrugged, adjusting the strap of her backpack. I'm fine. Just disappointed, I guess. About the concert? Don't take it personally. Baker always goes with what's safe before competitions. I know, Grace said. It makes sense. Tyler was quiet for a moment. You know what doesn't make sense, though? Rick's missing Monday's rehearsal for a basketball game and Tuesdays for a doctor's appointment. That's a lot of practice time to lose right before a performance. Grace stopped walking. Both Monday and Tuesday? Yep, which means you'll be playing. So technically, Baker is trusting you with the preparations, just not the final show. Grace considered this. I guess that's something. It's more than something, Tyler insisted. It's your chance to really show what you can do. Trust me, everyone's going to be paying extra attention on Monday and Tuesday, knowing the concert is coming up. On Monday morning, Grace woke up with a strange feeling in her chest, not quite nervousness, but a kind of heightened alertness. Today mattered. Today was a chance to prove herself not just to Mr. Baker, but to the entire choir. She dressed with special care, choosing a soft blue sweater her mom had once described as bringing out the silver in her gray eyes. Not that it mattered what she wore while playing piano, but still. Today she wanted to feel her best. At school, the hours crawled by until choir rehearsal. When she finally took her place at the piano that afternoon, Grace could feel the energy in the room, more focused, more serious than previous practices. The concert was days away and everyone felt the pressure. Mr. Baker seemed especially tense. Let's begin with the Mendelssohn piece. Remember, this will open our program, so it needs to be flawless. Grace positioned her fingers over the keys, waiting for his cue. When it came, she began to play, putting everything she had learned over the past week and a half into her performance. She followed Mr. Baker's conducting perfectly, matching every subtle change in tempo, every dynamic shift. When they finished, Mr. Baker was silent for a moment. Grace braced herself for criticism. Better, he said finally. Much better than last week. Now let's try the Whitaker. Coming from Mr. Baker, a better was high praise indeed. Grace felt a small burst of pride as they moved through the rehearsal, piece by piece. Each time his comments grew less critical, more specific and technical, treating her like a serious musician rather than a charity case. By the end of practice, Grace was exhausted, but exhilarated. She had played better than ever before, and even Mr. Baker seemed grudgingly impressed. Same time tomorrow, everyone, he said as they packed up. Miss Walker, I expect you to review the transitions between the Thompson and Bach pieces. They weren't as smooth as they could be. Yes, sir, Grace said, already mentally planning her practice schedule for the evening. As she gathered her things, she heard Mrs. Ortiz approach Mr. Baker. She's doing remarkably well, don't you think? The Spanish teacher asked quietly. She's progressing, Mr. Baker admitted. Progressing? Mrs. Ortiz's voice held a note of disbelief. Robert, she's exceptional and you know it. I've never seen anyone pick up your arrangement so quickly. She has a good ear, he conceded. But the concert is about more than just playing the right notes. Yes, it's about music, Mrs. Ortiz said pointedly. Real music, which is exactly what that girl brings to the piano. Grace hurried out before they realized she was listening, her cheeks warm with Mrs. Ortiz's praise. Tuesday's rehearsal was even more intense. With the concert just 3 days away, Mr. Baker drilled them relentlessly, focusing on the most challenging sections of each piece. By the end, even the most dedicated choir members were showing signs of fatigue, but not Grace. Despite playing non-stop for nearly 2 hours, her energy never flagged. If anything, she grew more focused, more precise as the rehearsal progressed. The music flowed through her, each note, each chord, each delicate phrase a living thing under her fingers. As they finished the final piece, a complex Bach arrangement that had given Rick trouble for weeks, an unexpected sound broke the silence that followed the last note. Applause. Not from Mr. Baker or Mrs. Ortiz, but from the choir members themselves. Embarrassed but pleased, Grace ducked her head. All right, settle down, Mr. Baker said, though his voice lacked its usual sharp edge. That will be enough for today. Everyone remember, Thursday's rehearsal is our dress rehearsal. Concert attire required. As the choir members began to file out, chattering excitedly about the upcoming performance, Mr. Baker approached the piano where Grace was gathering her things. Miss Walker, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. A word, please. Grace's stomach clenched. Had she done something wrong? Despite the choir's enthusiasm, had Mr. Baker found fault with her playing? Yes, sir, she said, turning toward his voice. There was a pause, then Mr. Baker cleared his throat. Your playing today was quite satisfactory. Grace blinked in surprise. From Mr. Baker, this was practically a standing ovation. Thank you, sir, she said cautiously. I've been thinking, he continued, his voice still measured. Given Rick's inconsistent attendance and the importance of proper preparation, It might be beneficial to have you continue working with the choir through the dress rehearsal on Thursday. Grace's heart leapt. I'd be happy to, Mr. Baker. This doesn't change the plan for the concert itself, he added quickly. Rick will still perform on Friday, but having you at the piano for Thursday's rehearsal will provide continuity. I understand, Grace said, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. Getting to play in the dress rehearsal was a huge step up from where she'd been just days ago. As she left the music hall that afternoon, Grace felt like she was floating. Mr. Baker's reluctant praise echoed in her mind, alongside the sound of the choir's spontaneous applause. For the first time since joining Westlake High, she felt truly seen, not as the blind girl, but as a musician in her own right. That evening, as she practiced the transitions Mr. Baker had mentioned, her phone buzzed with a text message. Her mom read it to her. It's from Tyler. He says, rumor has it Baker asked you to play Thursday too. The choir revolution has begun. Grace laughed, her fingers never leaving the keyboard. 2 more days to prove herself. 2 more days to turn Mr. Baker's quite satisfactory into something more, something that might convince him to let her play in the concert after all. She knew it was unlikely. Mr. Baker was nothing if not set in his ways, and he had already announced that Rick would be performing. But still, Grace couldn't help hoping. She had come so far in such a short time. Maybe, just maybe, something would happen to change Mr. Baker's mind. What Grace didn't know, what she couldn't have anticipated, was that something was indeed about to happen. Something that would test not only her musical abilities, but her courage as well. Thursday morning dawned gray and rainy, matching the nervous flutter in Grace's stomach. Today was the dress rehearsal, her last chance to play with the choir before Friday's concert. She had practiced until her fingers ached the night before, determined to make this rehearsal perfect. As she got ready for school, her phone rang. Her mom brought it to her, saying, "It's Mrs. Ortiz." Grace frowned, taking the phone. Teachers rarely called students, especially this early in the morning. "Hello? Grace, I'm sorry to call you before school," Mrs. Ortiz said, her voice tight with urgency. "But something's happened, and I thought you should know right away." Grace sat down on her bed, suddenly alert. "What is it?" "It's Rick," Mrs. Ortiz said. "He broke his wrist during basketball practice yesterday afternoon. He's in a cast now. He won't be able to play at the concert tomorrow." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "Is he okay?" "He'll be fine, but he's out for 6 weeks at least." Mrs. Ortiz paused. "Grace, Mr. Baker called an emergency meeting with the choir officers this morning. He's in quite a state." "What's he going to do about the concert?" Grace asked, though she already knew the answer. "That's why I'm calling. He hasn't made a decision yet, but I wanted you to be prepared. There's a strong chance he'll ask you to step in." Grace's heart pounded in her chest. This was exactly what she'd been hoping for. A chance to prove herself at the concert, but not like this. Not because of someone else's misfortune. "I feel terrible for Rick," she said. "I know you do," Mrs. Ortiz said warmly. "That's what makes you special, Grace. But Rick will heal, and in the meantime, the choir needs someone who can play at the level you've shown this week." After hanging up, Grace sat motionless on her bed, her mind racing. If Mr. Baker asked her to play tomorrow, it would be the biggest opportunity of her musical life so far. But it would also mean facing an auditorium full of people, including competition judges with barely a day's notice. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. It was one thing to play in rehearsals, where mistakes could be corrected and tried again. A formal concert was something else entirely. "Everything okay?" her mom asked from the doorway. Grace took a deep breath. "Rick broke his wrist. He can't play in the concert." "Oh dear," Susan said. "That poor boy. Does that mean—" "Maybe," Grace said. "Mrs. Ortiz thinks Mr. Baker might ask me to fill in." "Oh, honey," her mom said, sitting beside her on the bed. "That's a big opportunity." Grace nodded, unable to put her swirling emotions into words. Excitement, fear, sympathy for Rick, determination. They all battled for dominance inside her. "You know, whatever happens, your dad and I are so proud of you," Susan said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And if Mr. Baker does ask you to play, we'll be right there in the audience cheering you on." Throughout the school day, Grace could barely focus on her classes. During lunch, Tyler found her in the cafeteria and slid into the seat across from her. Did you hear about Rick? He asked without preamble. Mrs. Ortiz called me this morning, Grace confirmed. Baker's been in meetings all day, Tyler said, his voice hushed with excitement. Word is he's considering canceling the concert. Grace's heart sank. Canceling, but why? I thought, oh, don't worry, Tyler interrupted. It's not going to happen. Mrs. Ortiz and the choir officers won't let him. They all want you to play. They do? Are you kidding? After your rehearsal on Tuesday? Everyone was blown away. Tyler paused. Except Baker, of course. He's still being Baker. What does that mean? Tyler lowered his voice further. He's worried about how it will look, having a new student, especially one who's... He trailed off awkwardly. Blind? Grace supplied, a familiar heaviness settling in her chest. Yeah, Tyler admitted. He's worried about the judges' reactions, about how it might affect our scores. It's total garbage, of course. Anyone who's heard you play knows you're amazing. Grace pushed her lunch tray away, no longer hungry. She'd encountered this kind of doubt her entire life. People assuming she couldn't do something just because she couldn't see. But somehow, coming from Mr. Baker after all the progress she thought they'd made, it stung worse than usual. It doesn't matter what he thinks, Tyler added quickly. Mrs. Ortiz is on your side, and so are all the choir officers. Heck, even Rick is on your side. He called the choir president this morning and said you were the only one who could learn all the music in time. When Grace entered the music hall that afternoon for dress rehearsal, she could sense the tension in the air. The usual chatter of students warming up was muted, replaced by hushed conversations that stopped when she walked in. She made her way to the piano, counting steps in her head as she had done dozens of times now. But before she could sit down, she heard Mr. Baker call her name. Miss Walker, a word. Grace turned, heart pounding, toward his voice. Yes, sir? I assume you've heard about Rick's unfortunate accident, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Yes, sir, Mrs. Ortiz told me. Is he going to be okay? He'll recover, but he obviously cannot perform tomorrow night. Mr. Baker cleared his throat. This places us in a difficult position. Grace waited, barely breathing. Under normal circumstances, I would consider postponing the concert until our primary pianist has recovered. He paused. However, that would mean missing our opportunity to perform for the regional judges, which would put us at a disadvantage for the competition. I understand, Grace said softly. Therefore, Mr. Baker continued, his voice stiff, I am asking if you would be willing to serve as our accompanist for tomorrow night's performance. Despite expecting this, Grace felt a rush of both excitement and terror. Yes, sir. I'd be honored. This is not a commitment I make lightly, he warned. The standards for this performance remain exactly as they have been. I expect nothing less than excellence. Of course, we will use today's rehearsal to ensure you're fully prepared. I've asked the choir to arrive early and stay late if necessary. He hesitated, then added, I should note that if at any point I feel the quality of the performance is being compromised, I will make alternative arrangements. The implied threat was clear. If she couldn't meet his exacting standards, he would find another solution. Even at the last minute, I won't let you down, sir, Grace said, lifting her chin slightly. We shall see, he replied, then raised his voice to address the entire choir. Places, everyone. We have a great deal of work to do today. The rehearsal that followed was the most intense Grace had ever experienced. Mr. Baker worked them relentlessly, focusing on every detail, every nuance of each piece. He was particularly demanding of Grace, stopping her repeatedly for the smallest imperfections. The chord in measure 63 needs more emphasis, he would say. Or, you're rushing the eighth notes in the bridge. Each time Grace would acknowledge the correction, adjust her playing, and continue. She refused to show frustration or fatigue, even as the rehearsal stretched past its usual ending time. By the time Mr. Baker finally called a halt, nearly 3 hours had passed. Grace's fingers were stiff, her back ached, and her head throbbed with the effort of maintaining such intense concentration for so long. That will have to do, he announced. Not quite praise, but not quite condemnation either. Everyone remember, tomorrow night call time is 6 o'clock sharp. Concert begins at 7:30. Full concert attire required. As the choir members gathered their things, Grace remained at the piano, flexing her tired fingers. She could hear murmured conversations, snippets of encouragement directed her way. "You've got this." Sounded amazing. Baker's being extra tough because... Then suddenly, silence fell as footsteps approached the piano. Grace recognized Mr. Baker's distinctive stride. "Miss Walker," he said quietly. "Yes, Mr. Baker." She turned toward him, bracing herself for more criticism. There was a long pause, then, "I want to be clear about something. Tomorrow night's concert is extremely important for this choir. These students have worked all year for this opportunity." "I know, sir." "Do you? Because I need to be certain that you understand the pressure, the expectations. This isn't a school assembly or a practice session. The judges who will be attending tomorrow have the power to determine our standing at regionals, which in turn affects our chances at state and nationals." Grace nodded. "I understand. And yet," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "despite having less than 2 weeks' experience with our repertoire, despite the unique challenges you face, you seem remarkably confident." Grace considered her response carefully. "Mr. Baker, I've been playing piano for 12 years. I've performed in recitals, competitions, and formal concerts. I've accompanied singers and instrumentalists. Music has been my life for as long as I can remember." She paused, then added, "And as for my unique challenges, as you call them, they've never stopped me before, and they won't stop me tomorrow night." There was another long silence. Grace wished desperately that she could see his face, read his expression. Finally, he sighed, a sound not of frustration but almost of resignation. "Very well, Miss Walker. I will see you tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. As his footsteps retreated, Grace heard Mrs. Ortiz approach. "Don't mind him," she said softly. "He's under a lot of pressure." "I know," Grace replied. "But so am I." Mrs. Ortiz laughed quietly. "Yes, you are. But if today's rehearsal is any indication, you're more than ready for it." She put a hand on Grace's shoulder. "Get some rest tonight, okay? Tomorrow is going to be a big day." As Grace gathered her things and prepared to leave, she was surprised to find her hand steady, despite the enormity of what lay ahead. She had worked for this, prepared for this, dreamed of this. Tomorrow night she would show everyone, especially Mr. Baker, exactly what she was capable of. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the upcoming concert would become a turning point not just in her musical journey, but in her life, and in the lives of everyone who would witness what was about to unfold. Friday evening arrived with a buzz of nervous energy that Grace could feel the moment she entered the school building. Her parents had dropped her off at exactly 6 o'clock, wishing her luck with hugs and promises to be in the front row. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," her dad had said, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what happens tonight." Now, as she made her way to the music hall guided by Tyler, who had been waiting for her at the entrance, Grace's stomach fluttered with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "The place is already filling up," Tyler told her as they walked. "I peeked in the auditorium on my way to meet you. All those regional judge types in their fancy clothes looking super serious." "Not helping, Tyler," Grace said with a nervous laugh. "Sorry, but hey, you've got this, seriously. After yesterday's rehearsal, you're more prepared than anyone." When they reached the music hall, Grace could hear the hum of voices. Choir members warming up, chatting in hushed, excited tones that immediately quieted as she entered. "Grace," several voices called out at once. She felt herself being surrounded, gentle hands touching her shoulders, words of encouragement coming from all directions. "You're going to be amazing. We've got your back, just like rehearsal, right?" Grace smiled, deeply moved by their support. In just 2 weeks, these people had gone from strangers to something like family. "Everyone to the chorus room for warm-ups." Mr. Baker's commanding voice cut through the chatter. "Miss Walker, a moment, please." As the others filed out, Grace turned toward Mr. Baker's voice. "Yes, sir?" "How are you feeling?" he asked, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. The question surprised her. "I'm ready," she said. "Nervous, but ready." "Good. Nervousness is natural, even beneficial in small doses." He cleared his throat. "I want to go over a few things before we begin. We've made slight adjustments to the introduction of the Bach piece, nothing major. Just a tempo change in the first 8 measures." "I remember from yesterday," Grace assured him. "And you recall the cue for the soloist's entrance in the Mendelssohn?" "Yes, sir. You'll give a small tap on the podium right before." "Good." Another throat clearing. "You'll be seated at the piano when the audience enters. I'll introduce the choir. We'll take our places and then we'll begin." Between pieces, remain at the piano. I'll announce each selection before we perform it. Grace nodded, taking mental notes of everything he said. This wasn't her first performance, but it was by far the most important one of her life. One more thing, Miss Walker, Mr. Baker added, his voice dropping lower. About the Whitaker piece. Yes? It's our most challenging selection, as you know. I considered removing it from the program after Rick's injury, but he paused. Well, after yesterday's rehearsal, I believe we can still present it at the level of excellence this choir is known for. Grace recognized this for what it was, the closest thing to a vote of confidence she was likely to get from Mr. Baker. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. See that you don't, he replied, his usual brisk tone returning. Now join the others for warm-ups. We have 45 minutes until curtain. The time before the concert passed in a blur of warm-up exercises, last-minute rehearsal of tricky passages, and the rustle of students changing into formal concert attire. Grace wore a simple black dress her mother had helped her select, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. You look very professional, Mrs. Ortiz told her, as she guided Grace to the auditorium, like a real concert pianist. I feel like I might throw up, Grace admitted quietly. Mrs. Ortiz laughed softly. That's perfectly normal. Even Robert gets stage fright, though he'd never admit it. Just remember to breathe and trust your training. The piano bench felt different on the auditorium stage, slightly higher than the one in the rehearsal room, the cushion firmer. Grace ran her fingers lightly over the keys of the grand piano, familiarizing herself with its feel. It was a magnificent instrument, recently tuned for the occasion, each note ringing clear and true. Gradually, she became aware of the sounds of the audience entering, the murmur of voices, the shuffling of programs, the occasional cough or laugh. The auditorium was filling up. She straightened her posture, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. At exactly 7:30, she heard Mr. Baker step onto the stage. The audience quieted immediately. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice confident and professional. Welcome to Westlake High School's pre-regional concert. We are honored to have with us tonight several distinguished judges from the regional choir competition. Committee. He continued with thanks to various supporters and a brief overview of the choir's accomplishments. Grace half listened, focusing instead on her breathing, on the feel of the piano keys beneath her fingertips as she rested her hands lightly on them. Before we begin, Mr. Baker said, I would like to acknowledge a last-minute change to our program. Our regular accompanist, Richard Wilson, suffered an unfortunate injury earlier this week and is unable to perform tonight. A murmur ran through the audience. In his place, Mr. Baker continued, we are fortunate to have Grace Walker, a new student at Westlake and a remarkably talented pianist in her own right. Miss Walker has had just 2 weeks to learn our entire competition repertoire, a feat that would be impressive under any circumstances, but is particularly noteworthy, given that she performs entirely from memory. As she has been blind since birth, the murmur grew louder. Grace felt her cheeks warm at being the center of attention, but kept her posture straight. Her expression calm. I assure you, Mr. Baker added, with what almost sounded like pride in his voice, that the standard of excellence you have come to expect from our choir remains unchanged. Now please welcome the Westlake High School Chamber Choir. Applause filled the auditorium as the choir members filed onto the risers behind Grace. She could sense their presence, feel their energy and focus. Then came the small tap of Mr. Baker's baton on his podium, their signal to begin. Grace took a deep breath and began to play the opening chords of the Mendelssohn piece. From the first notes, she knew this performance would be different from any rehearsal. There was a magic in the air, an electricity that came from the combination of months of preparation, the presence of the audience, and the high stakes of the occasion. The choir's voices joined her playing, perfectly balanced and blended. Grace felt goosebumps rise on her arms at the beauty of the sound. She followed Mr. Baker's conducting flawlessly, attuned to his every subtle cue as they moved through the program, from the stately Mendelssohn to the complex rhythms of the Thompson piece to the delicate harmonies of the Bach arrangement. Grace lost herself in the music. Her fingers seemed to know exactly what to do without conscious thought, leaving her free to feel the emotional landscape of each piece, to breathe life into every phrase. Then came the Whitaker, their most challenging selection. Lux Arumque required perfect balance between piano and voices, exquisite control of dynamics, and an almost supernatural connection between conductor, accompanist, and singers. It was the piece that Mr. Baker had once claimed would be impossible for Grace to perform adequately. As she played the ethereal opening chords, Grace felt a strange calm settle over her. This was why she played piano. This feeling, this transcendent connection to something larger than herself, was what she lived for. The choir's entrance was so soft it was barely perceptible, growing gradually in intensity as the piece built toward its climax. Grace followed Mr. Baker's lead with perfect precision, instinctively understanding his intentions sometimes even before his cues. When the final chord faded into silence, the auditorium remained absolutely still for several heartbeats. Then came the applause, not the polite, measured applause of earlier pieces, but an enthusiastic outpouring that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Grace smiled, her heart pounding with exhilaration and relief. They had done it. They had performed the most difficult piece in their repertoire flawlessly. The remainder of the concert passed in a similar state of heightened awareness and perfect synchronicity between Grace, Mr. Baker, and the choir. By the final piece, a rousing, spiritual that showcased the choir's dynamic range and Grace's technical skill, the audience was completely captivated. When the last note sounded and Mr. Baker lowered his hands, the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. Grace could hear the thunderous applause, the cheers, even a few whistles from the back. Probably Tyler's friends, she thought with amusement. Mr. Baker guided her to the center of the stage to take a bow. As she curtsied, the applause intensified, washing over her in waves. She had never felt so proud, so accomplished, so seen for who she truly was. Then something unexpected happened. Mr. Baker leaned close to her ear and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Extraordinary, Miss Walker. Simply extraordinary." Tears sprang to Grace's eyes at the hard-won praise. Coming from Mr. Baker, these simple words meant everything. After the performance, the reception area outside the auditorium buzzed with excitement. Grace stood with her parents, accepting congratulations from audience members and choir families alike. Several of the regional judges approached her, expressing their amazement at her performance and asking about her musical background. "Grace," Tyler's voice called out, cutting through the crowd. He made his way to her side, practically bouncing with excitement. "You'll never believe what's happening. The judges are talking to Baker right now, and one of them, the really important one with the bow tie, he said our Whitaker performance was the finest he'd heard from a high school choir in 20 years. "Really?" Grace couldn't keep the smile from her face. "Really, and Mrs. Ortiz is telling everyone how you learned the whole program in 2 weeks. The judges are completely blown away." Before Grace could respond, she heard Mr. Baker's distinctive footsteps approaching. "Miss Walker," he said, his voice different somehow, warmer, less rigid. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Her parents squeezed her hands encouragingly, then stepped aside. "Of course, Mr. Baker," she said. "I owe you an apology," he began, surprising her completely. "When you first came to audition, I made assumptions about your abilities based on ignorance. I believed that your blindness would be an insurmountable obstacle to performing at the level this choir requires." Grace remained silent, hardly believing what she was hearing. "I was wrong," Mr. Baker continued. "Not only have you proven yourself capable, you've demonstrated a musicality and intuition that is rare, exceptional, in fact." "Thank you, sir," Grace said softly. "I've spoken with the choir officers, and if you're willing, we would like to offer you the position of permanent accompanist for the remainder of the year, including all competitions." Grace's heart soared. "What about Rick?" "Richard has already agreed. In fact, he suggested it himself after hearing about your performance at yesterday's rehearsal." Mr. Baker paused. "He'll be focusing on basketball, which between us is probably for the best." His heart was never fully committed to the choir. "I would be honored," Grace said. Her voice steady despite the emotion swelling inside her. Later that night, as her parents drove home, Grace sat in the back seat, replaying the evening's events in her mind. "I still can't believe how many people came up to congratulate you," her mom said, reaching back to squeeze her knee. "And those judges. They were so impressed." "Mr. Baker seemed different after the concert," her dad observed. "Almost like a normal human being instead of a drill sergeant." Grace laughed. He was actually nice to me. I'm still in shock. Not me, her mom said firmly. You worked hard, you proved yourself, and you changed his mind. That's what happens when you refuse to let other people's doubts define you. As they turned onto their street, Grace thought about how much had changed in just 2 weeks. She had gone from being the new blind girl to being recognized for her talent, accepted by her peers, and respected by even the most demanding teacher at Westlake. More importantly, she had found her place, a place where she belonged not despite her blindness, but as her complete self, challenges and gifts alike. The journey wasn't over. There would be more rehearsals, more performances, more battles to fight. But tonight, as the car pulled into their driveway, Grace knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. After all, she had already accomplished the impossible. She had changed not only how Mr. Baker saw her, but how he understood the very nature of music itself, as something that transcends physical limitations, that speaks directly to the heart, that connects us all in ways that go beyond what any eyes can see.